Thank you. Well, good morning, Morena. This is day 3 of the Plan Change 2 hearing for the Kapiti Coast. And today we had a sort of a lay day, so we thought we'd use that day to go through some of the questions and items that we had for the Council's planning team. And the first thing that we wanted to do was to kick off by looking at the rezoning requests and going through those. And Bob and Miskel, the lead consultants on the Plan Change 2 planning elements, has prepared a document called PC2 Appendix F Rezone Request Maps, and that provides a very useful spatial indication of where the zone requests were. And what I thought we'd do is go from north to south. Personally, what I'd like to do is to look at that locality and then explain the basket of requests for rezoning, and then how you approached it and what you agreed with and what you didn't agree with. And that can include also reductions. I'm sorry, I might put it on a plane mode. It's got quite a much. It's got a strong vibration engine.
I think it's by the microphone.
Oh, that's why the microphone.
Yes, it's not by the microphone.
Well, ET was going to come out of it. The other thing is the adjustments to the precincts, because, for example, or not, maybe not here. There's one area that we visited our site visit that there's a special garden area down a cul-de-sac, and the sort of thing extended, and you brought it back because you agreed it had a sort of special character. I can't remember the street, but it's quite close to the aquatic complex. So just explain the whole thing spatially so we get a sense of it.
Okay, well, I'll let Katie run through the rezoning request next. That's the evidence that she's getting.
Yeah.
And I guess it makes sense to do what about.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, so.
Okay.
I've got mine here.
Oh, you've got it. So in terms of how just to explain how the map works, the red outline are submissions from submissions who have requested rezoning, while the yellow area is the existing, obviously the existing area. And then the purple is existing zone.
Yeah.
And so so the yellow kind of, if you can see, there's proposed to be under so I actually, for all of these submissions, I actually considered them to be out of scope for the most part, because they didn't submit the draft, and they were considered two. So in terms of the two texts, one being on the status quo or considering this to be two, obviously we didn't mean that to suppose they were under the two orders. Well, the ones that were on the existing area.
Right.
Yeah.
So there weren't any that were just on the edge, except perhaps the one on Mangarudu Road, where consideration was given, or at least it was an adjustment to boundaries and so forth.
Yes.
And although where there is evidence, nevertheless pursuing the request, could you identify those?
Evidence. Well.
Evidence by keeps the evidence applied to the.
Yeah.
The
The submitters. So did any submitters contest, has any submitters contested?
Oh, yeah, so some little pictures of that,
Yeah.
not in Otaki.
Yeah.
Those are actually all contained in one map that we'll get to.
Yeah.
And those are, in Otaki and Waikato East.
Right.
And two of those submissions, three of them I considered on scope, but haven't met our criteria.
Yeah.
And one of them I considered one, and so they actually considered it to be out of scope based on my experience. Whether it was.
Right. So in Otaki, all of those areas that are identified, no one has presented evidence contesting your assessment.
No.
And some of the larger ones
Yeah.
Are quite obviously significant expansions of the residential zone.
Mhm.
Probably requiring infrastructure planning and all of those sorts of things.
Was Mansell in scope or out of scope?
I think it's been largely in scope.
Yeah, that's right. That were largely in, that's right.
So the Rangiora you've recommended to extend.
Oh, no, so I didn't actually, because of the NPSH here, so it was in, I can do that in scope because it was an extension. But I did not recommend that the extension because of the national statement of productive land. It became an area of productive land that was not managed under existing district plan.
Right.
Which
So
one
you-
are we looking at? Sorry.
That is for the 155.01, which is on the left side of the map.
What's the middle number? Is it because the maps, what's on?
155.
Oh, 155.
So you've excluded that because it has some fast 1, 2, and 3 in it.
I had a consistent position with that was just a rezoning that because they didn't get the, at least under my system, they didn't get it.
Right, which were the the size or nature that didn't enable them to be used productively. In any event, they're not contesting that assessment. Right. Okay, so the areas for rezone to precinct B on the main street.
So these maps are focused on the redesign.
Oh, okay.
It changes to precinct.
Yeah.
We can do the changes to precinct.
Yeah, I think it'd be best just to go to Ojaki and deal with Ojaki in its entirety.
Okay, so the change to precinct, there is not shown on this map. I think it's made to, which is the track changes version.
Yeah.
At the very back, we have, I guess, a series of map changes. And on pages. So the PD page numbers would be 306. And 307, the changes.
Thank you.
Sorry, it's not it's the page yeah, I think I've got yeah, we could have it on the screen. So the first one,
Yeah,
identified as 785.01, that's the British Black Cover Bar.
Yeah.
So they sought they saw that their area of being excluded. They talked through the character of that, understanding this thing, reason. My primary reason was actually that those are technically outside of 400 impact that we use.
Yes.
And in the methodology in the section, we actually noted that we have included these areas because of the like that we achieve it. So they came back and not just about character, but also about root development.
Yeah.
And I didn't see any reason to disagree with them on those numbers.
Yeah.
Given that the extent that the source of they removed is out, it's actually outside the middle.
Right.
So I agree with them that should be removed as part of that was a targeted. And it has a very minor fee.
Right.
So that was the reason there. And then on the next page, in the southwest of that same catchment around the Hilltop Main Street centre, there are two subdivision plans and some more readjustment of boundaries that make those sites fall within the catchment on the road, and those significant on that basis through the sites that are business. And again, I disagree with them on that. So when you take the removal and the addition, yes, you're still going to need like addition to the overall area. So we're looking at policy very simply the so that's the basically some
Okay, that makes sense to me.
and neither of those are valid.
And just as a matter of interest, is the Wānanga in actually the residential zone?
That's
That's interesting. Okay, so going back to Otaki, the appendix F. Some people proposed, as a matter of interest, rezoning to town centre, that strip of residential along the back of the commercial there, and you've rejected that.
Yeah.
But you've said it's within scope, or
Yes, I consider that to be in scope because it was a view of the plan that was supposed to be notified PC2. And it was also oh yes, I think
yeah, so I didn't even it's not from one side, I appreciate it's a little bit of boundary blurring here. I'm sure we're not kind of what about the justification for doing so. I believe in respect to that, it is about the existing predominant existing use of properties on that street being in the town centre nature. So I think we'll wait to hear from but originally there was no submission.
yeah, it is a bit of an in-transitional area, isn't it?
yes, and that's a better one. which is just that small section on the right at the end of the town centre zone. So we actually have, or I have recommended this be approved because they submitted and provided some information on the current land use and site views effectively, and also that the consented activity have been effectively operating under a commercial town centre.
Is this the legal offices and stuff?
Yeah, it's over the road from the main cave.
Yeah, it's in the.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's the real estate agent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So that wasn't kind of.
no.
No. Yeah.
No.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so I can put that. Yeah.
All right. That's all right. So Jackie. All right.
So there's a mixture of repeats here, which some are considered to be out of scope. So going in the north are considered 1, 2, 3 out of scope.
Are you doing all of them? I don't think in or out of scope, is it?
What's the fear? I can.
I don't know what.
Is it preferred if I go through, or is it preferred if I talk about the, if you ask me about your questions?
We're on map 2.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about whether are we doing all, whether they're in scope or out scope? I thought Katie used to start on whether things are in scope or out scope, or just going through each side.
I thought we just get a general sense of every area which is covered by these maps and go in zone, out zone.
So I'm going from
That's
the northern one. Through- Going just down to one effect, I believe that they actually came in to that because of the evidence. That's a good way to start. So I consider that to be in scope, but I recommended that it wasn't approved because it actually is outside of the white line. So as well as not meeting one of the criteria, the plan enabling housing, the classroom, the street side, it is actually outside of the Waikanae urban region, so therefore the district plan provision looking at, there's that line is actually drawn just before the site, so that would actually, in my opinion, require an assessment of the entire line if we were to start rezoning properties outside of it in the residential.
Yeah, I was wondering about those criteria generally, how you, because I met all through 3 out of 4. Yeah, is it just one throw you out? How do you do that balance?
I think that, well, for me, it had to meet because of the way that Section 32 was prepared and a assessment for the land rezone by the council to be included. All those consistent had to meet every criteria, so I felt it was, I should be consistent in the way, the way it's valuated. So it doesn't meet one. The widest, which is
You have to meet all 4.
yeah.
So 142 and 43 are out of scope, and 24, 68 and 68 are in scope.
Yes, yeah.
Now, is that, I must confess, I haven't read the evidence from that submitter. Is that rezoning opposed by anybody? Right. Right. And so that's not, are you agreeing to that rezoning?
I am, no, I have assisted with the criteria. but it wasn't. It's got- Well, it has an existing structure plan. But it's not a consent, so, until that structure plan has been removed from the file.
The reason I ask is because I did a case a couple of years, about a year and a half ago, for a company called Waikanai Land North Company, and at that time, Wellington Regional Council was getting very excited about wetlands, and they identified, even though there was a resource consent, they identified what they said was a wetland based on a methodology that they developed that meant that they tried to stop stage 2 of that development. And I applied for interim and final enforcement orders against the regional council to stop the abatement notice. So I have actually acted for the landowner of this situation. So if this was a contested matter, then I might have to let the other panel decide it. But it sounds to me like no one's really contesting the determination.
Not an evidence file.
No. Well, that's the real contest, isn't it? It's a contest of evidence. So that area I am familiar with has quite detailed structure planning to respond to character and values. All right, so that's why you've rejected that. Yeah. I think stage 2 has been constructed now. Stage 2 and 3.
And then we go, move into the knowledge of the Catholic Expressway, and then submit a 32.
Yeah.
So I have put that in scope, but I have recommended it, like the accepted deposits covered entirely by the Expressway designation, which I believe is similar to another today.
Yeah.
It's on another map.
They're in a different map though, I think.
Yeah, they're on the.
Yeah.
But yes, that's the main reason they haven't submitted the evidence. We're not, as far as we're looking. To hear, and then next to it, we have some other 76 that is Transpower. And they have requested a green zone and their national grid overload into the site. And so I have again not accepted that because I consider the district plan appropriately manages that. That's a bit that yeah.
And 168 is the gentleman in the camper van that we saw yesterday. Now, I agree that it doesn't necessarily make a great contribution to supply, but it does seem to me, other than the fact that it's perhaps crossing a site boundary, quite a logical sort of adjustment.
Yeah, I think I mean, I can, looking on the map and seeing that it's contextually, I can understand that, and it's just that wider. It's the issue is that the line is formed, which defines the rural boundary effectively, and I think that if you're rezoning land on the outside of it, that potentially is outside of that. And so I think that line actually might need to be considered.
Right. Now,
this site was considered back drive status. And so the line that has been going to, it's not just the boundary between the rural and the Tiwi side. There is a physical line in the district and that is related to strategic direction policy.
why can I what?
The Waikanai North Edge. It's
Oh,
a
okay.
line.
Yeah.
And it runs from the coast.
Yeah.
Right through to the hills.
Yeah.
And this site is on wrong, if I could say. It's like, and the informal development policy, is about maintaining the integrity of the right on the beach. So that may well be appropriate for getting that right. But rezoning that line is somewhat contrary to that policy. And so that is what we were talking about, a strategic vision. So the strategic vision being the right line within each line, and whether it's appropriate to rezone beyond that, actually considering it.
Is that what you're saying? You have to do on the plan change to shift the line?
Well, the appropriate place to consider that in mind would be holistic. I think that's not what we're looking at. We're looking at one side.
Yeah.
So that is the lines that
And that policy hangs out of the plan.
it's in the plan.
And what about your growth strategy? What does that say about that divide?
The T2 pie doesn't talk about that. It does show intentions for future growth, medium long term beyond that line. So at some stage it would be necessary to consider that line and its totality and whether it's appropriate. But we were looking at one side, not the whole line. This may change. So we didn't really have the latitude to consider the entire line change. Because the line itself is not contrary to policy for these areas. So that's why we're
Okay. Well, can you give me that policy and the line, show me on a map? So what you're really saying is that raises broader strategic issues that should be addressed in your assessment holistically. But that from an historical point of view, that development, that pattern of development reflects an historical boundary
yes,
in the sense that the lots that were created were deliberately created with the size and scale that would create a clear demarcation between residential and, I guess, lifestyle or yeah. And 143 and 164 are sort of obviously out of scope, but they punctuate the point that Andrew was making, which is that there are pressures within that community to enable high levels of intensity of development.
Another thing I should also mention about these maps is the ones we've shown in the dashboard. We've had to simulate what the spatial scheme might have been. So we actually, there was no clear map anyway in the application submission about we wanted to see something. We've actually provided something about the ones that aren't dotted, it's clear from the submission of spatial scheme.
I think the word is infer rather than insinuate. Otherwise, you're implying that you're saying something quite bad about something by assumption, and not really, not really. Sorry, I couldn't let that pass. Right, so then we're on to Waipuna and Oswaitonga, which is map 3.
So this one has got a mixture of sites, which there is you'll see some of this on Monday for that is filed evidence. So I will go through the submissions from well, we go from the one that the mouse is on at the moment. And so this is to rezone, this is kind of mission to.
Sorry, again, this is one I've done with. I've done with a lot of ones that this was talked about yesterday. By the White Mountain Beach Residents Association, this is the local White Mountain Beach.
Yeah, the bakery ones.
Yeah, and they sort of shouldn't be.
Yeah.
And I think that would be sort of basis that we weren't proposing to change the rezoning. I didn't consider it to be a strong basis to remove the notice from the application. If you do, there would be no notice. And that, so that was.
Yeah. That's fine.
So we'll move it just to the right, similar to 209. And I consider that to be in scope, but I determined it to meet material. As you can see, it is next to an urban area. But this in front. Doesn't have a good dimension, but it's just a little bit. Oh, okay, yes. So that had existing constraints on the site, including a cultural area to things and also
Yep. And here you're going down into is it I can't remember the name, but it was a Eastern European name. Is that where she is?
No,
She's further south.
that's further south.
Further south,
Just
yeah.
near Pop Road.
So 208, we've actually, that's the next one down, I think we're out of scope.
Mhm.
And that is because it wasn't a business. And so, in terms of, just to back it clear how I determined what was considered a section of level 2 and premises, those that submitted on the draft plan change were considered an appendix B, and they had a specific consideration undertaken by Andrew and recommendations were made that come out to include it were notified. Some sites were included in appendix N, which was actually the growth strategy. It's not actually a growth strategy, it's the growth assessment for property. And that's a non-specific assessment, and we've actually included to support the land rezone, but supposed to be rezoned by the council. So some submitters were note that they were considering those appendix N, so therefore they were in the scope of that. But because there was no specific consideration made, it wasn't a case where we looked at the entire urban region and said yes, no, to all the sites. I can say that they weren't actually.
So just take me to appendix N to give me give that some. So this will be in the notified instruments. Yeah. Just very nice the way you've got everything, all the naming. It's really, really helpful. So what PDF page is that? Roughly, you find.
So the appendix here, there's a PDF.
Yeah, so what page in it, and that will show me this area as being under consideration.
Oh, yeah. So this is a report that I prepared some time ago, and its purpose was
Right.
So I think what Ed is trying to say is that some of these sites are within areas that were considered in this report. So this report looked at large areas across the district, large and small areas across the district.
Right.
some things that are known. And essentially through an evaluative process, identified whether they would be ideal candidates for either short or medium or long-term urban development. But it didn't recommend that rezoning. It just recommended that.
Right, so this is a high level strategic
Yeah.
spatial assessment
Yeah.
of potential areas for growth.
Yes, correct.
And Katie's saying, because some people will say, because this report was in N of the 32 assessment, it was in scope. And she's distinguished between those that were specifically assessed through the draft assessment. But what was this just simply a contextual document to give us some lineage about the thinking about growth, or to inform particular sites that were responded to in the draft, or what?
So its specific purpose was to provide information in relation to the sites that we had proposed to rezone as part of the legal council had proposed to rezone as part of this. Because those sites, this contains information that is relevant to those sites. So it was supporting information for sites that we proposed under the.
Well, that's quite important, isn't it?
It is quite important, but what it was a set of recommendations on areas throughout the district.
Right. So you were actually just enlisting the information obtained from an earlier study for those site-specific rezoning. So that was the 32 assessment. All right, that helps me. Thank you. I wasn't quite over that, but I don't apologize for that. There's a lot of moving parts. Okay. Gotcha. Right. So that's the western side of the highway.
Mhm.
And then we're on the eastern side of the highway.
Yes, and so that's also, same solution, scope, below that 189, I consider it didn't meet. I consider that to be in scope, but I didn't consider they meet all of the criteria. I think the main one being that because on a large amount of planning advertising to that site. That one.
Some of that looks like it's quite a logical expansion of form.
Mhm.
It may not meet the criteria for greatly enabling, but it might be a logical extension.
Mhm.
So you'll probably do a site visit of that area.
Okay. Okay, now,
Have those people given any evidence? I don't know.
now we need to rely on the map, and maybe we go from left to right.
Yeah.
So we're both on the map. So it's 43, which is this, and that would be.
Which number? What number?
43. 4303. Yeah. It's four numbers here, but yeah.
Are they coming up there?
They're coming on one day, and they have big notes. So I consider this to be marginally in scope, and that the reason for it to be marginally in scope is because it meets the first test. The second legal test was around using the opportunity to participate, and I considered there was two opportunities, or three. If you consider they submitted on that there's opportunity on that draft, and then they made a submission, then that was considered and notified, and then they made another submission and were notified, and then the third submission was processed available. But I consider that it's important to be made, given it's not clear how many people would be affected by this quite large site, and if they would be aware of that proposed zones, given that PC2 primarily neighbouring the NDIs.
Okay. Now, was that in an area that was also part of the appendix N in the notified version?
Yes.
So wouldn't that have been another opportunity in the sense of general sense of awareness that the area was under consideration?
Still, in terms of appendix N, I think because it's such a large representation, it's a greenfield assessment. it wasn't proposed in such intentions of.
No, I appreciate that.
Yeah, there was no note saying, we considered all these areas, we should do that. I feel like it was maybe not obvious, but it was in the notes or not. Yeah.
But if Andrew said, I've sent out the draft, they've come back and said, include me.
Yeah,
And one of the rationales for saying, include me, is Appendix N.
yeah,
Then a person who's attentive to these things would be aware that this was a sort of in the ether, as it were. I agree that it will never be the same as personal notification of a plan change. But I guess it's a question of what's reasonable, isn't it? In terms of that history of that site, has that been up for debate for some time?
not.
No, I mean, as far as my awareness of the site began with the submission on the draft in terms of intention. The landowner. Yes.
And it looks to me like there is a pattern of development incorporating a range of sites, not all of which the landowner are interested in this own. And so is the concern that people who've got sort of lifestyle blocks would be caught by that residential zoning, or?
So the main consideration of what's in scope of review those criteria. So actually, I considered that it didn't meet the criteria for structure plan. That it's sufficiently large to require structure plan approach, and so therefore I believe it would require further alterations to the district plan proposed on the PC2.
Yeah.
Because it's not large in size.
How much? Right.
And so,
And are there values within that site that would have to inform a structure plan?
I don't think anyone submitted noting in value in your initials. Yeah, I don't have evidence that if there is a waterway down through it, which proposes structure, very and a basic private structure plan to dealt with the board these areas. It's something that we provided for the site. But no.
A question about the structure plan, if that was the fulcrum upon which you would refuse it, which does seem to me the point of difference, like you're saying, theoretically, this is a good idea, but it needs to be properly planned.
Yeah.
Whether another tool is to give the area a specific RD status for residential development that required logical, coherent form of development. Like, in other words, I think a large area like that probably does need a structure plan. I agree with you. But I'm not sure that that's the only way to skin the cat. It could be that you could adjust the activity classifications for activities, certain activities to require a coherent form of development.
In my opinion and experience, because I've practiced construction planning, so quite familiar in the sector, which is similar kind of experience on revenue. And without the broader plan and a document that shows, the layout and how that appearance should be, I find that people just undertake and have development within it, and there's nothing guiding that bigger picture. And so I feel that the RD status may be useful, but that I think with the ability of the consented officer that actually enable connections across the site, I think that might have that influence, which is So
Because you wanted
yeah.
to cut a comprehensive whole as opposed to the piecemeal, so if it was RD. It might just be, they might put an
Yeah.
application in for us, but for a small bit, but you can't see how that's going to connect to the
Yeah.
rest of it.
Yeah.
I guess that's,
Yeah.
that would be my,
Hmm.
yeah.
So you'd have to really create a role suite in substitution that would give you the council the discretion. But a far better tool would be a structure plan.
Yes.
Gives you an informed
Yes.
framework.
There's also another, if I may, there's another matter, in that section, what can you do under an RPI and what does the new section requirements around big roads mean for that sort of making it? Because if you simply rezone the area, as generally zoned, but put an margin status on that, and there's never typically come through.
Enable. Yeah.
The alternative approach would be to have an RD status on subdivision, because you need subdivision to enable.
Yeah.
But and that would also be contrary to the areas that requires subdivision activity. But it's those subdivision provisions which actually can gain in any structure plan, because if you have structure plan, if you have subdivision roads, all their even if they're controlled at the status, but their standards are compliance with the system structure plan, then that can be the vehicle, and I think in a general sense, the reason why we're doing these kinds of sites in the first place is because you couldn't simply just rezone them without that structure plan in place with the appropriate subdivision because of movement to them to enable the development of the area. So I think that would be like kind of technical matters you might have to consider when we considering how to incorporate these things. That's really not.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying.
Well, you think that's like all of this to right, and that is the mix of
So they're coming in around, like they're coming with non people.
yeah. So I did similar to the
This is what, SO 23.
yes, that is
Did you want to deal with that after?
I'll reserve my final position after the but I will address just because I know we like, and even if they have just my criteria and have applied it, so I think it's useful just to explain my perspective. And so it's again, I consider it to be my joint scope, which is site that made the assessment, and I consider that site so I consider it to not meet the test where it's next to an urban area. And then they have demonstrated that a small portion of the site with the road access, that's infrastructure connecting to it. But as a whole, I still consider that site is like next to an urban area, and I think the map will demonstrate that. And considering the environment with road in a large area, it's still connected to it. That's what it's next to me, in my opinion. It's doing it. But and then they also discuss the variance of that require a structure plan, given it's 20 hectares in size. And they actually have a land use consent for subdivision approved, but this is under review by the neighbour. So that's that there. I again, given the context of the surrounding area, I still feel structure plan for the area is quite good because you wouldn't want to have a backward development that disconnected from the surrounding environment. And it's, as it's going to develop. So that's really proud.
They've kind of said that the infrastructure is available. So this, you're saying it's not, there's no room.
So I won't disagree that, they've provided information that shows that infrastructure is available to this one, the boundary, the road boundary.
Yeah.
And so I may following the submission. But that's,
and your point there that, of course, they've got a subdivision, but it's for a really, low density. Yes, so your concern there is that what it wouldn't be meeting the density that you have, that the NGRs.
it's more, well, actually, it's not in terms of the subdivision consent. I actually consider that actually irrelevant in terms of the NBR is being applied because they've got that under the current governance regime. But I do think that the area school would benefit from such a concept. Just given, and they say that the site doesn't require it, but I think actually wider than just the site, that area, including their site.
Right, so your view is, given the regular nature and it's somewhat isolated pattern from the existing residential, and the potential for other land in the area to be considered as well, it's worth looking at as a complete package and a proper plan change process.
Yes.
All right,
Okay, we'll move to the other edge, and this is the one line.
Yeah, they're coming to that. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yes, so I actually considered this one to be out of scope, given it was only used appendix in, but I do understand that given the location of the site, the size and how close it is to that you still know whether it how it meets the criteria.
Yes, I
And
think
so, yeah, and so in terms of the criteria, similar to the other two sites, I consider that it really requires a structured approach. Given, it's such a, you can see it for the last couple of rural land, it's quite close to the same thing. So I think that it's definitely the size of it, similar to open planet.
yeah, I wondered if you were concerned about the access.
Access, and also, we really have indicated that they have ahead of
That's right, that's my.
to be involved. And even though they from the evidence that they generally are, it seems that they're accepting of it, they would like more. Especially given the river running alongside. And also the fact that there's highly productive land within the area that therefore doesn't have the other two switches out. Being able to manage it. I would, if I was assistant criteria, I'd say. Yeah.
how much fun have they had?
Then there's probably a matter of this.
That seems to be a common refrain. Across the, I'm trying to get a bit of grip on just what that means. I don't think. It's not only iwi, it's probably Waikanae Beach Residents Association. Everyone's feeling a little bit under pressure.
It's interesting because it is close to the, it's so close to the centre and railway station and what those things go. I'm sure we'll hear more about that.
So I'll just the top one, which is 122. That was to rezone the amazing to residential. And I rejected this request because I considered that was appropriate, and also it wasn't actually. It's just but yeah, also one thing to note is that high awards wider special they've requested intensification a little bit, seem to assume that the sort of remains, but also you've been a evidence that it's got to be.
And time of the evidence, like, seem to have trouble.
Yeah, so you've tended
yeah.
to say if you're altering a fundamentally design, PC2 isn't the vehicle, and it could also have problems with fairness and so forth.
Yeah, unless there's like some seriously compelling evidence.
Yeah.
But in relation to this particular one, I know what I did, drop that and big start.
Yeah.
And then in terms of the next submission, 18.
Yeah, that's actually, that one we heard from yesterday, that's the Claim Street apartment.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, so they saw that the town zone be downsized to a
Yeah.
So, and again, we rejected that on the basis that, firstly, it's up to the design and it's consistent with the initial plans of the
Yeah.
So.
Mhm.
So up in the top, so right hand corner, which is 77. Managed to improve. So I actually considered this request and deemed it to be appropriate and had subsequently suggested that the rezoning of the land, and then people in the precinct.
which one is this? 77.
77.
So that's
Ruahin Street.
Yes.
so you've recommended extending the residential zone.
Yes.
Mhm.
And there's been no evidence.
So the rezoning in PC2 proposed the area that's striped, you were just adding a little bit to it.
Yes, so that's, yeah. I consider that, yeah.
Mhm.
Now I go to a back, and values. That's relevant, that's the evidence. And I think the Monday, so I consider this to be in scope, but I recommended not be approved because there's sufficient constraints. So particularly the lower and also a large unit of size that they consider actually already in a residential zone. And I consider that if you look closer at the map, it's actually quite large, probably not quite large, map with extensive wetland. Across the lower side.
So we should go and see that site.
Yes. And also the northern site next to the express, so has got this mention across it, it's similar.
Yeah.
And then looking just to the right, so the 1, 2, 3, we did on this today, that was the site that I showed. It's not being done because of the specific information, but
Yeah.
So that's the only reason, there's no site constraint, so you would support that if Waka Kotahi were comfortable with that.
I believe so. Which provide
Yeah. Okay, well, we've got it, that was Ms. Leah, so Leah Osvia.
Is that one, is that the, is that, is that the Sunfield Garden Centre? Oh, they're on.
No,
it's further down than that. Oh, it's next to, yeah.
Actually, one thing to note before we leave this map is that the section of Poplar Ave, that's the small pocket that's proposed to be rezoned as part of PC2 by the council. I've actually recommended this be removed because there are flooding constraints in the site, which it's not actually in the operating district plan, and so therefore actually change the recommendation.
So which one's this one?
There's no link, there's no, you could just that small piece of land.
Off Poplar Road.
It's more of the land that's the.
Yeah,
No marker next to it, but that was supposed to be. But in our technology system, the system side, consider that it's doesn't actually one of the criteria.
It was council name.
Oh, it's not.
It's the old designation, actually. Isn't it?
No, it was proposed to be redone. It has a subdivision, it's been subdivided for residential. And it's been basically, and one of the principles in terms of rezoning, any of the areas funded by PC2 is that district can permit of the district plan provisions. We would be comfortable with all the district plan provisions management sites on the site. Now, with respect to flood hazard, all the other sites have flood hazard mechanism which manages that constraint. This particular site has flood hazard identified, not in the district, but the district plan maps don't include it in the flood hazard maps, so that constraint is not managed by the district plan. Which, and so this was raised in this particular site was raised in so that was
so, why did Triangle give you scope to look at that?
because they oppose rezoning of this broader area seeking further information about and amongst other things constraints.
Right. Really?
And so there's been no evidence filed with respect to Katie's recommendations.
Makes sense.
The last, and this is actually, I consider this solution to be better scope, because it wasn't, this is actually pretty good or in since, so no further assessment has been made there again.
Mhm. Right. That's it. So, probably would like to do a site visit of, map. Personally, I've been talking to commissioners, but personally, I think the map 3, on the eastern side of,
What is it?
well, that one, and also the one adjacent to the expressway on the eastern side.
23.
Yeah, and then the one in map 5 on the expressway where it has a lot of wetlands and other values. It seems to me, though, with your proposed rezoning, that you felt that any constraint arising from the expressway could be managed, like you could get residential zone quite close to the expressway.
Yeah.
So, gosh, that name always causes me to be like a horse about to stumble on a jump. Ms. Leah Kovskia's name submission isn't really constrained by proximity to the expressway. It's really just the designation, and you don't have any knowledge of why the designation would remain in that location. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
They built the express, they built that lane. So those people all had access to Spirit State Highway,
Right.
and they were severed by the expressway. So they put in that wrong, what's the name, the lane wrong lane. They put that lane in to provide access to them. So there's these bits of land which
Right.
essentially designated as would be undesignated.
Right. So you think the designation was more to enable ancillary works to the
It was just
ancillary.
that broader with the designation to create the road, and then you have those that's left over that you live the designation.
Right.
They would have done some, but they haven't done that. But
Yeah.
there's discussion.
That's helpful to know.
Yeah.
there are also regulations that will be installed and the operators of the plan that manage that issue
Yeah,
in relation to sites.
which is my point, that you're satisfied there are controls in place already to manage the interface. So that wouldn't govern your boundary choice.
We did all of the noise assessments, it's when they got when they built it, or they didn't show those houses that were there. Didn't put in noise funding and there. So it's,
No, but with the MDRS, which is now a new world, rezoning that land of this
yeah,
Leo Koskia's, you're potentially putting in 12-meter, 3-story, aren't you? So that's a whole another level of potential reverse sensitivity. But you're satisfied that those things are managed by the plan.
One thing to note is that the company re-estimated that we not.
They're actually intending to give their evidence.
So that part is statement.
The part is statement.
Okay. Well, I have a sense that there's Leo Koskaya is in the middle of a bureaucratic nightmare that I'd like to extricate it from if I could. So I may be inclined to make a direction for Transpower to explain why this particular site still has a designation on it. So what did I say? Or we will seriously consider rezoning it. But I prefer to, if Hannah would just follow up with her and see how she's progressing and facilitate that. I prefer not to get into the fray too much, but it sounds to me like she could be caught in a bureaucratic nightmare.
What we can say earlier, substation,
That is like a Katahi, I was wrong, not that. Yeah, okay. So we'd have a look at that area as location as well. All right, so that completes the rezoning. And then we're coming to other topics that you might want to cover off. And I think you said that you wanted to say something about pretty well.
Yeah, well, I wondered if that just we've got the shopping list.
Yeah.
Like there's one shopping list.
Yeah.
Starting the good papers.
Yeah.
So how much time do we have to right?
What time is it now? I think we normally break about
10:30.
10:30, so.
So, what's happy? Sorry, not what's happy, very well. You know, there are essentially the three issues: the setback issues, there's the noise control issue, and then there is the vibration control issue. So I'll just address each through those things.
Yeah.
So firstly, with the setback issue, I kind of just want to clarify my position that I've stated in my evidence. I wasn't suggesting that landowners seeking horrible access would be a solution to this problem. That was, I agree that that's not a solution to this problem. What I was trying to demonstrate in my evidence was that Dairy Rail have control over the legal access to the horrible thing and choose to define access to that. So that was what the point I was trying to make, not that that's the solution. The reason that I was trying to make that point is that the issue about how much space you have to maintain the building is between the boundary and the building. It's not unique to railroads that applies to all boundaries. No landowner can assume access to neighbouring property from take maintenance. and maintenance requirements will vary, station maintenance requirements will vary between building design, site issues related to site, probably, etc. And I don't think it's efficient or effective for the district plan generally to define setbacks based on differing maintenance. That said, there is an issue here, and that is the issue appears to me to be the accidental encroachment of maintenance activities into the rail corridor, like road scaffolding, or things like scaffolding, etc. And so the diagrams to demonstrating that just that. And obviously, there's a legal encroachment, so people just occupying the rail corridor without. So those are issues. But this is a sweeping restriction. And I look at the planner, I look at everything and so I do think more consideration needs to be given to alternative approaches. And thinking about this and looking at the diagrams yesterday, I wonder if enough consideration would be given to additional approaches. One is the extent to which Rail could or even should be managing safety issues within the designation. And obviously, there may be opportunities to do that. I can't speak for Rail, but certainly are there ways that the boundary of the designation is constructed, like fencing, etc., that could manage safety risks, and also place them to things within the designation, unsafe things within the designation, and that be considered as part of our designation by every rail in terms of managing that safety risk within the designation. The other thing, though, that I was considering also is looking at those scaffolding diagrams. It strikes me as not really a setback issue, but it's actually kind of a height in relation to boundary issue, because it appears to me that the risk increases with building. And so the question is, well, does the NDRS height in relation to boundary issue actually address this already in a more appropriate way than one setback? And so doing the calculations at 12 metres tall building using the NDRS height in relation to boundary setback, which is 4 metres of boundary and 60-degree inclination, would have a 4.6 metre setback from the boundary. So, which is already,
Well, I wondered about that.
yeah, so it's already
Why
almost 5 metres. And then I thought, well, if you combine dealing with residual safety risk within the corridor with the setback that's already going to occur, is there a problem that needs to be reduced to one setback? The benefit then is that the height relation to boundary wall is responsive to height, so obviously it's the The other benefit there is that if the wall is breached, then very well well, are likely to be party and engaged in the process. So I just wonder that wouldn't be a more efficient approach than the last.
Well, that may require, though, a notification standard or requirement that if the height in relation to boundary adjacent to a rail corridor is breached, that Rail is notified.
Well, that notification assessment would
Still happen.
Any case.
And what about a fencing requirement as opposed to requiring Rail to fence it? But if height a certain level of density was exceeded or something, it had to be fenced.
Well, I'm also aware fencing matters are a matter between both parties on other sides of the boundary. I'm not sure what an appropriate fencing standard would be for that. I think that's probably a matter for Rail.
Yes.
To determine. I guess what I'm suggesting is that fencing is probably dealing with the residual risk at 0.4 of a metre that will
Not really. I mean, mine is more that if you get more children
Sure, yeah, okay.
into a location, so this is all about socialization and training. So if one family is sitting on a site next to a railway, it's a bit like living next to a creek.
Yeah.
Your parents are going to tell you this is a significant risk for having fenced it. But if you get much higher levels of intensification along locations, the potential risk is higher.
Yeah.
And particularly in town centre zones and so forth, where this would also apply.
Yeah.
You're getting large numbers of potentially large numbers of children acting close to a railway.
Yeah, I feel great, and so there would obviously be benefits to having a fence being down as a, it's not definitely what the design standard meant to be. For a fence to address those issues. I think having the requirement to have a fence as a standard, for example, obviously it makes not just the private income that has to be around and having to provide a fence, because fences on boundaries,
Well, no, not if as part of the standard permitted activity, they had to provide a fence.
Yeah.
It wouldn't trigger, it may not trigger the fencing requirement, may do actually.
some of the boundary I would have thought that
Right,
so I don't know what to do about that.
yeah,
Certainly, I think the requirement would address the same issue.
Mm. that makes sense, thank you.
So that's my view on the secret. The noise issue is mostly the vibration. Obviously, I'm not the first expert in the so I cannot say that Mr. Child incidents and the speaker of their head. And from a planning perspective, his explanation that the DBA actually occurs after 100 meters rather than 40 meters, is what it is, and I can't make it what it is. In some ways, it's a relatively simple issue to address in terms of plan change, simple change in numbers. There's no other change necessary. And it wouldn't engage in the issue that I think you raised about some of the other drafting issues. It's just replace the number and not the standard that we okay. So that's my position on that. I haven't got plans started. So then the vibration standard is more complex, and this is again section of so I don't argue that vibration is and reverse it for the issue in the mental health issue. It's the implementation of the standard that I struggled with. Firstly, it's not clear to me, and even from the evidence to say it's not clear to me what this standard means for the design of buildings. It looks novel. It looks like with the prior novel solutions that was acknowledged in some other evidence. There's no indication of what that means for the cost of either design and construction. And so, from a planning perspective, I'm not sure whether the requirement to comply with the standard might inadvertently prevent construction of buildings because they become simply technologically or financially unfeasible. So I guess what I'm saying is I don't know what would ask them to do. So that's my key concern. I don't think the cost in requirements essentially to around demonstrating that the costs are reasonably met because we don't actually know what these costs are. But and the second issue is I guess a bit more about maybe it's a legal issue. Is that it appears to me that the standard that pretty much applied derives its meaning in the Norwegian technical standard. Means Norwegian standard 8176. Now that standard is not referenced in the proposed standard by the and Mr. Charles does state that well, experts in the area should know it and should know that this means it's related to 8176. From a planning perspective, I think the law needs to stand on its own legs, and it needs to be if reference is required to the technical standing for the measurement game mean that standard needs to be referenced in the law. The problem we find ourselves in is that becomes incorporated by reference into the plan, and I'm unclear whether it's appropriate and possible to do so through submission, because to insert that through that document by reference for the submission, we'll have kind of got an end run around part 3 of Schedule 1, which sets out the things you must do in order to incorporate a document by reference into the district plan, which includes the requirement to make the document available for inspection prior to incorporating the plan and consult with the reason about doing so. So none of that part of Schedule 1 stuff would happen. So I'm not sure it's appropriate being incorporated by reference for submission. I've raised this in my evidence and was adding them to this.
So have you looked at this reference document?
No, I haven't. It's you'll pay a gift for it, and it's certainly not something that the council has.
So probably Anna needs to ask Durrell for a copy of that, because I'm not going to pay for it. So if they could send me a copy of that. Problem, the Norwegian, the Scandinavians have done a lot of work on those types of standards, but they sometimes don't always fit the New Zealand context. So I'd need to look at it anyway.
And my concern is not incorporating. My concern is the process of incorporating documents.
I understand that, although you do say if the standard is to be introduced, it should squarely confront the technical document to which it refers, so that people are directed not inferentially but directly to that document. And then the second leg is, well, if it is to be incorporated, doesn't it have to follow that process?
So that's my position.
Yeah. Oh, that's very helpful. And why don't we just break there? And then we come back. What other topics did you want to do on our topic list?
So there's some methods around biohazard mapping.
Yeah.
You asked for some biohazard areas.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was what have the character items to be.
Yeah.
Postal cases of the qualifying method. Consequences or unintended consequences.
Yes. Yeah.
And then there were certain methods. Capacity around what's happening. I think we discussed characteristics qualifying method.
Yeah.
Retirement villages and
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just those provisions.
some changes to the design guides.
Yeah.
And public primary provisions. Cultural practices and cultural events in relation to the employees. And timing around processing timing around. So
I've got a few little rats and mice things to whether they're wash up at the end or, you know, like really detailed things.
We can do that today. Or whatever.
Okay.
So tomorrow is a lay day, isn't it? All right. Well, I think that would be really useful to do it after morning tea. But thank you for that thinking about QRL, that's useful. And if Hannah, you could just get that to the document, I will put a cold towel up my head and read it.
obviously the naming of the precinct is really important. And we attempted to be as anodyne as possible when we named it coastal qualifying acid precinct. We deliberately didn't want to use the word hazard because, and I know that some submitters have sought that we rename coastal hazard precinct, and we've rejected it on the basis that actually the hazard management approach is yet to be determined there, so we don't think it's appropriate to use that name in the precinct. We can exercise some further just poetic license to try and make that more anodyne as a title. So that's something we're open to as well. You're quite the wordsmith, so you may have some views too. Yeah, the term interim may be able to be because obviously yeah. Well, in this case, it's well, yeah, but I guess the problem here is that this is not intended as a permanent measure. Yeah, that's why the name is actually really important. So yeah, we're open to looking at alternative wording there, but I do consider it as anodyne as we could have made it. So then you asked us three questions, or there were three questions that you were going to pose to us in respect of getting to the point where is this necessary because of particular policy statement, and then through that pathway become a qualifying method. So the first question was, is this implementing policies 23 and 24 of the NZCPS, or is it implementing section 6A of the Act? It's doing the former. We've not expressed it to do the latter, for the reason that it isn't a hazard management regime. So it does the former. So then the second question was, if yes, does the Jacobs report have regard to matters A to H in NZCPS policy 24/1? And from the evidence of Mr. Todd and his presentation yesterday, our view is the answer to that is yes. So then the third question is, why is it necessary to give effect to the NZCPS on that basis? So the key provisions here is combined 24 policies 24, 25 and 3. So both 24 and 25 refer to areas potentially affected. And obviously 24 talks about prioritization, prioritizing higher risk areas. I guess the general argument we've made is that it is relevant to address this area in this plan change because this particular hazard is simply not addressed in the plan. And therefore, in terms of priority, it actually has a significance because the other types of hazards are addressed by the plan. So then to come to policy 25, the term potentially is important because potentially is different to likely. And that's where the Department of Conservation 2017 guidance on implementing the NZCPS has some helpful guidance. And that was actually raised by PRO as a document we should be looking at, and we have. So that guidance document talks about the meaning of potentially. It refers to the Weir case, the Weir versus Kapiti Coast District Council case, which talked about potentially having a meaning that is so it talked about potentially being a worst case scenario objectively identified and evidentially based.
must by definition be a reasonable possibility. So it's an area potentially affected, it's not likely, but it's potentially, and there's an evidence base that says that. So that is part of the reason why we use that line, because it meets the potential. Stuff outside it doesn't meet the definition of potential. Stuff inside it, there is increasing likelihoods of that area being affected by coastal erosion. But if we chose those lines, then we would be starting to predetermine a hazard management approach with that by precluding an area that has been objectively identified as being potentially affected. So that was the how we linked it to policy 25. And then so the next step of thinking is there, well, in that thought process is that without a planning regime to manage this particular hazard in this area, we considered there to be a high degree of uncertainty that the risk of social, environmental, and economic harm or increase in adverse effects would not be increased through enabling greater levels of development without the hazard management regime in place. And so because of that level of uncertainty, policy 3 in the NZCPS guides us to take a precautionary approach. And so that is why we consider, when taking all those policies into account, this area is necessary to maintain the status quo and as part of giving effect to the NZCPS. So to kind of finish that, we've heard the metaphor about the cart before the horse. I think a more appropriate metaphor is about clearing the road so that the cart and the horse can get to its destination in an effective and efficient manner. So that is my answer to your pre-question. So next there was Commissioner Black, there's questions from you. We talked yesterday about character qualifying matter. If you have any further questions. Yeah. So the purpose of the work was to both update make sure that our understanding of the character, the factors that contribute to the character in these areas was clear. And it was to fill a gap with respect to under placement, with the Waikanae garden placement had no characteristics. So because we're coming from a position where there are these character areas in the plan. The default position is to remove them, but we considered because of section 7, we need to at least have regard to the removal of them and what that meant. And as part of, so the assessment had that function, but the assessment also had the function of trying to identify whether the character was of a class that could be addressed as a qualifying matter, and I mean as a section 6 matter, and the assessments, in my view, didn't reach the level of any section 6 matter. It was the character of these areas, while being special and distinctive, was fundamentally and enormously valued. As a result of those, or as an outcome of those assessments. And that is where we ran into the issue of objective 4 of the NPCUD, because we couldn't provide, we considered we couldn't, sorry, no, objective 4. Yeah, objective 4 of the NPCUD, which is about the urban environments. Yeah. Yeah. So, and the reason objective 4 is salient is because if we were to provide for these areas of the qualifying matter, it would have to be as an other qualifying matter. And that meant that the objectives of the MPCUD became relevant to that consideration under the statutory requirements. And so in our view, we couldn't get beyond that statutory or that policy objective direction from the MPCUD that sought that urban environments develop and change over time. Whereas the fundamental purpose of these areas and the provisions associated with them is to maintain and protect character and amenity value. And we saw that as being incompatible. So that's where we landed. I appreciate submitters have raised or other countries are doing it differently. It's not for me to comment on how other countries have managed to do this. This is the area. Yeah, we have, but that's not that, under, I'll get the section. It's not, it's not the, so we're engaging now. So yes, you're referring to section 77I, is it? Yeah, J, section 77I-J. Yeah, and so then that implicates, 77I-J is the other qualifying matter provision. Yep. And then yes, 77L then becomes so there are A, B, and C under 77L, and all of these have to be met. And I appreciate that C is the site-specific analysis requirement, but it's B that was the issue. And the objectives of the MPCUD. Well, certainly with respect to, no, that's, well, if it's an amenity value, I do think that it would be very difficult to justify why that's a qualifying matter in light of particular objective 4 of the MPCUD. Now, if some of those values are section 6 matters, then then this is not an issue. So it wasn't the site-by-site analysis issue that tripped us up. It was B, the objective of the MPCUD. Yeah. You also had questions around capacity at Waitaki. Ah. Yeah, so yeah, no, it was, yeah. If are you referring to maybe feasibility? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so in terms of feasibility, as part of preparing the plan change, a report was commissioned from Property Economics, which looked at the feasibility of development greater than the NDRS and the intensification areas. we deliberately didn't actually expand that to look at feasibility across all NDRS areas because we had to apply the NDRS regardless of feasibility. But what we wanted to understand was the degree to which higher density development beyond the NDRS would be feasible in these areas, because there was some degree of discretion about the project. And the key findings of that assessment was that that on the whole across the district, more apartment development would be enabled to become more feasible because of the PC2 in certain areas, but those areas were particularly the coastal areas and not Otaki. In fact, it found that in Otaki it would be unlikely that there would be anything beyond the NDRS there. From a feasibility perspective, and Naha Port Otaki have identified this in their submissions as well. So that is a summary of the kind of the feasibility position. Yeah. The next question was the use of precinct and any national guidance on in final order. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I've had a look into this. So there's no direction to use a particular zone for this plan change. When you're rehousing your plan into the national planning standards, there is direction on which zones you should be using in terms of equivalency. The operative plan already incorporated the national planning standards, so we weren't considering that as part of this plan change. Our sole consideration was what is the most efficient way of getting the NDRS and policy into this plan. We chose the precinct approach. That they are provided from the national planning standards. We consider they've been appropriately used. Final order will speak to the evidence. I understand the argument to be using a high density zone is better because it's clearer. It's which I don't disagree with. It would require a new chapter in the plan. It's more amendments to the plan to achieve the same policy and rule outcome. But I'm open-minded to that because I see their point of view. Absolutely, it would be a clearer picture. Yeah. 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 Well, yeah, that was my view is that the provisions of the zone speak for themselves. The description of the general residential zone itself is quite, in the national planning standards, is quite anodyne. It talks about a mix of densities, but it doesn't land on any particular one. So we considered that wasn't inconsistent with what we're achieving. Yeah, so the new normal. That the general residential zone is the medium density. Yeah. It has to be called something in the national planning standard. So the general residential zone is what the operative plan calls it. The operative plan has just the one zone. one residential zone, so general residential zone. So we considered that not to be inconsistent with the new NIML. And certainly, obviously, the direction we were given in the Act is to apply the NDRS to relevant residential zones, which included the general residential zone. So that implied to me that it wasn't necessary to change the name of the zone. It was necessary to just incorporate, if there's only one. So that we landed on that position. I appreciate final review. It comes with extra amendments to the plan. There's no doubt for consideration, and that's why we didn't go down that path. Yeah, I think climate orders I can use regional consistency, which I see also as being a valid argument, but not necessarily one we were strongly directed by for this, because the district plan is the district plan. It stands on its own legs. So that's the guidance on that. The next thing was retirement villages and Arapotama. Yeah. Living accommodation. Yeah. 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 Yeah, so there's a bunch of issues here. And I'm very aware that the Retirement Villages Association has a very strong position and they'll be presenting to us. But I think I'm happy to spend a bit of time on this because I appreciate that it's complex. Firstly is that supported living accommodation, all those taxonomies that you're referring to, that's in the operative plan and it's not something we initially sought to amend as part of this process. So supported living accommodation, and actually I think it's probably, for clarity, it's probably good to just address the Arapotama side now. So Arapotama have not submitted on this issue. Yeah. Okay. Well, no, they've brought up a different issue, which is community corrections activity, which is more relevant to industrial and commercial zones, but we can address that separately. So that's the supported living accommodation provision is about yes, there's a permitted activity rule which provides for 6 people on site and live in here. And so breaching that is a discretionary activity rule. And really what supported living accommodation is trying to be is it's trying to provide for a range of different what are essentially retirement accommodation activity. And that's set out in policy GIZ 16, which we actually do propose to amend in response to submission. We propose to amend that policy in response to submission from the Retirement Villages Association. Yeah, so it's on page 58 of Appendix A to our evidence, which is the track changes version 58. Yeah. So what we did here is we in response to those submissions, we looked through and thought, well, okay, what is the issues here with respect to the NDRS and changing character? And the key issue was at subclause 3 was talked about. Yeah, so it originally said will reflect the residential nature and character of the location, which we considered to be too linked to the existing environment, and not enough to the planned character, right? So because I agree that there is a change of character that caused by created by the NDRS, and that should not be seen to hold back the time of accommodation. And yeah, design guides do, and again, there's the flexibility in the design guides for the applicant to say, well, okay, we're a retirement village, and certain things don't apply to us, and certain things do. So the key issues were not so much when I read this policy, we're not so much with built form and location, but the key issues are actually a broader urban structural issues. So there's on-site pedestrian movement, design and development to promote interaction with surrounding communities, and where practicable, and where practicable, be located within walking distance of essential facility. So those to me sound very resonant with the NPFUD. So the issue that's trying to be managed here really, I think, is large complexes that don't meet those broader urban planning issues. So my concerns vary depending on the zone. So, but it can be described as concerns with residential zone and then concerns with zone. So I'll talk about the residential zone first. Retirement villages are not provided for as a rule in the general residential zone. Supported living accommodation is, and that refers in the policy to retirement accommodation as opposed to retirement villages. Retirement accommodation being the accommodation residential activity component, right? So the accommodation component of the retirement village. Yeah. Yeah, but it can include the living here, right? So that's provided for. Expanding or providing a rule for retirement villages per the National Planning Standards definition then implicates what's noted in the National Planning Standards as and other non-residential activities that are ancillary to retirement, and that are ancillary to the residential accommodation component, but are provided for, would then be provided for under that rule. And my key concern was that the scope for what those activities are is undefined. And those activities could include activities that might be, or that may be, contrary to the objectives of the zone, but also contrary to some broader strategic objectives around consolidating commercial activities and centres, etc., and vitality of centres. And yeah. Yes, which is the 6 residents. Yeah. Mhm. No, so it's if supported living accommodation, which in my view would be retirement accommodation, but without commercial or other activities. So retirement accommodation with a live-in care component, that would be a discretionary activity under the discretionary activity rule for supported living accommodation. And it's, yeah, and it's a discretionary. And the issue isn't bulk and location of buildings, it's these broader integrative matters set out in policy GRZ P16. Yeah, yes. So that what I've described to you there is the status quo, right? Like that's what's being. Without a rule for it, that same cascade wouldn't apply if there were activities that didn't fit into the supported living accommodation activity. And I think from the evidence of the Retirement Villages Association, I think a clear example would be a restaurant and bar that's a part of a retirement village. And if you provided a permitted activity rule for retirement villages, then that restaurant and bar, part of a retirement village, would be permitted in the zone, right? Without any control over the effects that it might have, not just on the surrounding neighbourhood, but on other strategic objectives for locating these activities and centres. Now, it may be that issue is managed, but what's on the table in front of us is that issue isn't managed. And some examples could be, well, you could put the bar or restaurant as part of a retirement village right in the boundary of the retirement village. And while the argument is that because that's ancillary to the residential component, that is a residential activity, I just don't buy that in terms of the effects that are generated from that component. They're not resident. The effects of a bar or a restaurant, even if it's just used by people within the retirement village, must be different to a house or residential accommodation. But that issue is not managed by what's been sought by the Retirement Villages Association. So that's one issue there. And then the other is, well, obviously all the people that are living there will not then go to the centre, nearby centre to the restaurant. Well, they might, but they would also, I guess what I'm saying is that must have an effect on demand, or it must have even a residual effect on demand. When I say must, I say well, it requires the strategic direction for centres, which is set out in the strategic direction, particularly the business activities policy, do actually require consideration of this matter. And so it may be that there's an appropriate threshold for how much of this kind of activity is enabled in a retirement village that is sufficiently appropriate to not have a discernible impact on demand incentive. But that's not what's in front of us. What's in front of us is an unlimited element of ancillary activity without any restriction. So that's my key concern with and why I've landed where I've landed. And that's what we did with the Papakana provision for this particular issue. As a permitted activity standard, yeah, because then it allows effects to be assessed on a case-by-case basis rather than enabling an unlimited scope. Yeah. But I'm sure the submitters will have a lot to say about that. Can I also turn to my concern about central zones, because it's also the same regime as a permitted activity is being sought for central zone. So my concerns there are actually quite different. The concern there is that the scale of a retirement village would subsume the centre so that it no longer functions as a centre. And an example of that would be local centre zones. These are not big sites, and it seems to me that a retirement village on an entire local centre zone may result in that centre zone no longer functioning as one. And I appreciate that there is while this is not being sought through the permitted activity standards, one could locate commercial activity on the ground floor and then have retirement village above, but that's not what's being sought here. What's being sought here is a permitted activity with no standard in that regard to retirement villages. And so it's the reverse problem. And it's one argument could be, well, because commercial activities would be enabled as part of a retirement village, that's consistent with standards. But in this case, the commercial activities as part of a retirement village are for the residents only. So that doesn't contribute to the community's use of the centre. No, that's my concern. Well, the operative way that the relationship between residential and commercial activities works in the centres is that residential activity can't be on the ground floor, it has to be above. So that's fine. What's being sought here is a permitted activity for a retirement village. Yeah. Well, that appears to me. I think there might be some confusion on this because in their evidence they've talked about how that they would be subject to that provision, but in terms of the provisions they're seeking, it doesn't appear to be the case because they haven't mentioned that as a permitted activity. But that may well be, yeah, that could be tested. Yeah. 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 And that sounds to me like and I mean, that sounds to me like an entirely appropriate outcome. But is that what the rule enables? Or is that the only outcome that the rule enables? And that's my concern is, are we also enabling another outcome, which is something more horizontal? We have those are restricted discretionary activities, matters of discretion, if you hit the restricted discretionary activity status. Whereas we're talking about a permitted activity rule, where restricted discretion is only met if you're breaching the bulk notation standard. Yeah. So look, it sounds like there's scope to tidy this up. I think probably the key thing would be to make sure that ground floor commercial activity standard applied, but also that commercial activity wasn't exclusive to the retirement village, that was accessible to the community. Yeah. I think that could be a way forward. Yeah. Well, I think in terms of what that standard would be, it'd be the one that's already in the central zones, just making sure that it's applied to the retirement village. Yeah. No. Yeah. Yeah. No, that was my, yeah. And it's not helped by the taxonomy and the option bank. So it's the motivate seeking retirement unit. So they might be asking about the intention behind seeking that. Because that does seem to me to add some complexity to the NBO as well, by adding in a new kind of unit into the NBO. Yeah. Okay. Design guide changes. Timing and consultation. Papakaina provisions. I'm not sure whether we've covered what you wanted to cover. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, we accepted that position, and it's logical. The way Papakaina approaches the concept of ancestral land is not just to look at what is held under the Te Tere Whenua Māori Act or what might be owned now by Tangata Whenua, but it is future focused in terms of if Tangata Whenua acquire land that is ancestral in the future, that they should be able to avail themselves of the Papakaina provision. So on that basis, we agreed with Te Ate. In fact, it was multiple iwi who raised it, and we have recommended the application of the provisions to the central zones, but with respect to local centre zones, we've just talked about that issue. We've added a provision to make sure that there's commercial activity in the ground form. So we've accepted their position on that. The timing issue was always a challenge and always frustrating because of the time that we were given to prepare this plan change. And I think it is best to speak to them about their concerns about that. From my own personal experience and the engagement, for me I considered it to be incredibly valuable engagement, and particularly the drafting of the public final provisions that was very much a shared team exercise. Certainly actually kind of familiar. So there was that kind of practical engagement was really positive from my perspective, but timing was always going to be an issue. But the other key concern, and this I think you can particularly get this from the art submission and the Hapu submission, is the constraints placed on both of us by the legislation about what we could do about the concerns, and that's something we could never satisfy. Yeah, and I know that particularly Nahapu raised this with ministers, and they can speak to the responses they got from ministers about it. But that was another key problem. Yeah. 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 Right.
the officers' consultants' preparation. This is a resumption of the presentation by the council, and we had, I think, two items, the design guide and the timeframes. Is that all, we dealt with that now?
If Commissioner Pickford is happy.
Yeah.
And this won't take long, will it? So the a submitter
Mhm.
has suggested changes to the design guides, which largely the planners have accepted. And I think there's meaning lost in that,
Mhm.
in doing so. Should we just go through those?
Yes, and I'll just bring up my.
And I just wanted to ask what you think.
reasons.
So in 6.1 design guidelines, the first one was, I think, you've suggested you're recommending removing one because it duplicates two.
And I was referring to the residential centres.
Good start, good
So
question.
it should
Sorry,
say down the bottom.
residential,
Yeah, okay.
sorry.
What page is that?
Page 6, the design guide in appendix A.
Got that?
The residential, so the point, the first one, so the building should be orientated with the front of the dwelling facing the street, so basically street orientation. And it's considered that duplicates the second one, which dwelling should be considered a habitable space located in front of the building with windows and balconies. I think there's a distinction there that quite a large part of orienting to the street is having the entrance of the street, so that it should be orientation where you have the front door visible from the street and you have the window. So it's not, I can see, because I have to do quite a lot, I do a lot of design review. I see them trying to, many times, developers getting away from this if they can, and just having some bathroom windows or other windows, but it clearly doesn't read that it's oriented to the street, and I think that's an important issue.
Okay. Can I?
Yeah.
I agree with you. The question is whether removing one means that issue is not addressed.
I don't think so.
I also am alive to the submitters concerns about duplication. So I agree with you actually that two doesn't address all of the aspects you mentioned. With respect to entrances, there is a separate set of guidelines for entrances further on, which is 50 through 52, and one of those talks about ensure entrances as well as addressing letterbox are clearly defined and visible from the street and enables.
53.
So that's on page 13 of the guideline.
Entrances should be designed by all weather shelter entrances supply density to the together. Yeah, but that's not about indoor lobbies should have the visual clear connection.
But I also see your concern is that that by removing one is essentially seeks an integrated approach to all of these individuals.
Yes,
and that is the lost. So
I think so. I kind of think it's more punchy. It's right up there front. It's saying what you want to achieve, because in 52 is a little bit buried there, but the issue's buried in there. And I'm not sure that you could argue it. So thank you.
I accept what you're saying.
Great. Yeah. Thank you. Number 15. What do I push? 15. Multi-unit units and large with deep such abilities.
So this is section 6.1, item 1.
And now we're on item 15. Oh, yes, that was one.
Yeah.
15. Multi-unit units and long driveways. The frontage of dwellings along the turn should be treated in a similar fashion to frontage of public street. And that you cross that out and then thought that 17. Internal street to rear lane should be designed. Yes, that's not about orientation. 15 is about the orientation of houses to an internal lane, which is important in the same way that the street is. Whereas 17 is more about how you treat these streets and lanes
It's the same, it's essentially conceptually the same issue that we
It
just
is,
talked
it
about,
is.
is that it's
Yes.
by removing that, we've lost the
Yes.
integrated.
Yeah.
Direction.
Yeah.
So I would also
Put that back.
agree with you
Thank you.
on that matter.
Good.
So eighth grade comes off.
In point 15, the section that's been removed is will be reinstated. Is what we can is. There's only a couple more I had in here is on I think I'm in the centres design guide now. On page 9.19. Small units on large or deep sites should be accessed from these streets around office. Bunch of times. Oh, it's the same issue.
Yes,
So
so that
that was
same
just be
response.
changed. Yeah, thank you. And 33. When designing out the public space. Great spaces are unique and respond to local context. What I was thinking there, while the word unique is used and no one's accepting change there, but I do think that the consistency with adjacent spaces may be appropriate. So I think you've removed that. When designing outdoor public use of design elements, so like compatible design of adjacent buildings to create space that unique and responds to local context. I think I was thinking that adjacency was still important.
Yes, I think the submitter's concern is with, because it refers to compatible with the design of adjacent buildings.
Yes, it's the buildings.
Yeah.
Because
of you know, kind of architectural or material responses that required like compatibility with the architectural.
yeah, which I get that.
Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, what I'm thinking is sometimes if you're creating an outdoor public space and it's you can sometimes draw on the elements that you used in the
Yes.
the other spaces
Yes.
around to draw that in there so that people see that connection. But unfortunately, I don't think that's actually. But you've got respond to local context, so
Yeah.
perhaps that.
Alternatively, if the issue is the reference to buildings as opposed to spaces.
Spaces would be.
I think also the examples and the use. I think the key concern of the submitter is that they don't want to think it's, or they don't think it's appropriate to direct material physical responses that are like not mimicry, but over
Yes.
unduly related to the physical architectural materiality.
Well, that's because surface treatments are so different from,
Yeah,
from wall treatments, claddings, etc. So, yeah, I think because you can't. I'm requesting something, suggesting something that actually isn't in there. So, which is about adjacency with the consistency with adjacent spaces.
Yeah,
Would be considered.
so would you be more satisfied with something that said when designing outdoor public space, create spaces that are unique and respond to adjacent spaces and the local context?
Yeah, I don't know that unique needs to be.
Yeah,
I don't think they need to be unique because what I'm saying is it could actually be they read as part of the public street.
Yeah.
So that's a positive thing.
So this design guide, was that in the operative plan?
There was a medium density design guide in the operative plan that's simply not appropriate in the DRS.
Yeah,
So that needed to go.
Yeah.
And so these are filling their place
Right.
and these have been cut so that they are consistent with the
so this is a unique design guide that's picking up on the NDRS and the policy 3 and 4.
Yes, it is, yeah.
And so this has not been seen before PC2.
Or it was in draft PC2.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that.
But it's not on the operative plan.
No.
No.
And and some people have said the design guide's not appropriate, but you say it is.
Yeah.
And I'm not quite sure what document you're referring to, because I'm referring to PC2 Appendix A,
Yep,
page roughly
you in the-
246 in the PDF.
PCA one, what page, so? Oh, you're on. Can you see this? I can find it on your.
Yeah, so 246 is one of the first.
Yeah,
pages
so I'm in the
of
right
residential design guide.
Yeah.
Where
Which
we're
one are you
talking
in?
at right now.
We're in the
is-
centres. Is that residential still?
That's the residential.
Oh, we're in the centres.
Right,
So-
but I just couldn't find that. Oh, I see. There it is. Oh, yes, okay. That's it. I'm good.
So, I don't know if unique can be removed. I don't disagree with what you have removed, but that there's some issues in there that could be about consider. Or something, I think you had some words around it, but I
Yeah.
don't think it, I had just said that consistency with adjacent spaces may be appropriate, and I don't. It won't always be,
Mm.
but some references may be appropriate.
So it's a consideration.
It's a consideration because it does, you've got to make sure that these public spaces are included into developments, read as public spaces and not as private.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's false.
Would it be helpful in our written reply to propose something? that I think,
Yeah, you get it. Yeah.
yeah, because you do have the latitude, obviously, in terms of scope. Considerations.
Yeah,
I haven't read- I
but in
haven't read
terms
the
of our
recommendation.
recommendation, wouldn't we need to append a design guide
Well,
to our report?
this, we've assumed based on the first minute is that you'll be looking in our written reply from us for a contract, an R2 version of this.
Yeah,
And that, but this includes the design guides.
cool, okay.
So, we will include in that.
Yeah.
Um,
That's cool.
Brilliant.
There was only another little question I had that I suggested us the other day, and that's just clarification why is it 6 stories is variably 20 or 21?
Yeah, so, in the residential intensification precinct, so
Yeah.
the gen res zone surrounding the centre zone. it's
Yeah.
20, and then in the centre zone, where 6 stories enable, it's 21. So the difference is we added a meter.
Yeah.
Because it's centre zones on the assumption of a ground floor commercial activity.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Climate Order have suggested actually that we just amend the 20 to be 21 for consistency. I don't have a particular problem with that.
Well, when you get out of how many story, it doesn't, no, it's still going to be 6 stories, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you've still got your building
Yeah.
in
Still got
relation to
recession
boundary,
plans.
yeah.
So I don't have a particular problem with that additional meter.
No, it doesn't.
Doesn't strike me as being significant in terms of effects.
No, I don't think it is. Shading, I mean, it's just another, we're not considering amenity anymore, though,
Well, we are, but
but that's
I-
reflected in the
the
standard.
perceptible difference between 20 and 21 may not be, I don't
It-
think
it-
it's significant,
No.
Yeah.
No,
given that the height in relation to the boundary rule is still
Yeah.
applied, so.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's not, I don't think that's a big issue. No.
Yeah.
I think that's what I was wondering, I just realised sometimes plans have the ground floor is required to be 4 meters. So,
Yeah, some do. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Well, that's the job done. So, for tomorrow, I'll leave, Commissioner Black to liaise with Alfred about whether we're going to do a site visit assisted or not assisted. And if you perhaps just text me where I'm meant to be tomorrow to meet with you
Okay,
here
so,
in Taparamau.
so we want to do the site visits that we talked about today, any more than that we wanted to do?
Well, we might think of things as we go along, but
I'll come up with what they want.
okay, so I can remind you.
There was Waikanae East,
Yeah, so there was the site on the eastern side of the Kapiti Expressway, just south of Waitanai.
What number? What?
That's
So I've got-
6 SO 208,
so
209 and 189. 189, yeah.
Yeah.
And Waitanai East, which is
Yep, got that one.
SO 47 and 87.
Yep.
And
Rongamanu Lane. That's the one.
yeah, so that's S123. Rongamau Lane. I think they're ones that would like to go and look at.
Assistance would be good just to show us exactly what we're
Looking
looking at.
yeah. But just text me.
Yep.
And as long as it's not before 9, I'll be at the Kapiti District Council.
Okay, great.
What time are you thinking of doing that?
We did it once.
I make it too.
So you would?
I said, don't make it too early.
No.
My phone. All right. Okay, so thank you very much. And thank you, Alfred, and we'll see you again on Friday.
I love it.